Hi guys, welcome back to the Earthy Delights podcast, where today we are going to be talking to Eoin Hegarty. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And this is going to be a really, I think, a difficult conversation for maybe people to listen to, but I think one that's very much needed. Jim actually got in contact with Owen through the foundation HUGG after I listened to Fiona, one of the founders of the foundation, on the Grief Encounters podcast. And it's a this podcast is going to be about suicide and how we can maybe help prevent it and how we can deal with it afterwards. Owen has his own story, which he'll gladly share with us, and we can use his expertise, and hopefully we can learn from this. So Owen, how are we doing?
It's doing pretty good. All things considered, the shroud of coronavirus is obviously limiting opportunities to step outside the door, but we're grateful for what we have. We have a roof over our head, jobs that are paying, and overall, can't complain.
Yeah, I know we were planning to meet you in the Emerald Country, but unfortunately, Corona put a stop to those plans. So Zencaster is going to have to suffice for now.
Sorry.
I
don't know what I was going to say.
It's fine there. So basically, I think the best way to get started is, obviously we're going to bring up the stats at some point, because I think it is important to bring those stats up. But I first and foremost would just like to get to know about yourself and your story, and get to know a bit more about your dad. Really kind of make us appreciate who he was, rather than just becoming another statistic. If that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Owen is my name. I hail from the Midlands of Ireland. Grew up there through most of my life. Went to college in Limerick, and currently living in Dublin. I have the luxury of working remotely, so I'm not out of a job just yet. My dad, I suppose, separate to his passing, which was obviously quite traumatic. He died by suicide at the age of 60. Separate to him, he was a massive conservationist. He grew up fishing and hunting all over Ireland. Brought us fishing and hunting all over Ireland. He would have fished. You name the river, he's probably been on it, trying to catch fish, or successfully catching fish more often than not. And I'm just getting flashbacks now of him. We had a mobile home up in Ballina, County Mayo, and we would spend weeks of our summer holidays up there, and he would be basically getting up at about 5:30 in the morning to go fishing, and wake up everyone else in the mobile home in the process. So I just got a weird flashback as I was talking there. But so he had a huge passion for animals, and as time went on, animal welfare in particular. He was conservationist, quite active in conservation. That his particular passion was salmon fishing, and he was fundamental in a change in law in Ireland with respect to a process known as salmon drift nets. The quick background of it is basically salmon drift nets could take probably 60 to 70% of the population of a river each season, whereas fishermen would take maybe 5% of the population in the whole season. They would also spend a lot more money in the local economy. So it was quite it was quite important for him, because the stocks were dropping. The salmon stocks were dropping, but in turn, it was also important for the local economy that he wasn't just doing it from a selfish point of view. It was predominantly for the welfare of the rivers, the welfare of the local economies, and the welfare and the ability for people to travel to one of his favorite places to go fishing. He never wanted that to be at risk of disappearing. So he was, as I said, he was a very passionate man. With respect to his more personal life, he was someone who outwardly could be quite unemotional, but there was so much more going on inside. He grew up in a generation where boys don't cry. Where to talk about your emotions was a no-go. Instead, you'd either turn to alcohol or you turn to some other kind of vice to try and stay quiet. Basically, his own dad, while being quite successful in his own career, lost his wife. So my grandfather, my dad's mother, died when my dad was 14. So that would have left quite a scar on his life, and to not have had the support at that stage of life would have kind of set him up for an inability to functionally process emotions, and I suppose that in turn then, so the grief of that, no support, his dad turned to drink. It was a recipe for a mental health condition, essentially. A potential textbook mental health condition. But he was functioning. He was working he used to work in the bank. He was working from the age of 17. Worked until he was 55. He took early retirement, and at that point spiraled because he didn't have the love-hate relationship that he had with his job to occupy most of his time. So he quite quickly didn't feel a sense of purpose, and because me and my two brothers were essentially out of the house at this point. There was essentially no relationship between my dad and my older brother due to my dad's mental health. A lot of responsibility was put on my older brother, so he was the patriarch through necessity. My older brother took the role of patriarch through necessity because my dad, through his mental health, didn't have the emotional maturity to be the responsible adult, I suppose, in some ways. But aside from that, he was, as I said, he was an incredibly passionate man. He loved to sing, loved to have a few pints, loved his friends, made every opportunity to try and spend time with them. But when he retired, he didn't have the emotional foundation to be able to deal with the reality of the changing scenario for him. So he was hospitalized. The legislation changed in Ireland a number of years ago that you couldn't sign someone in who wasn't mentally, who if they were over the age of 18, you previously could sign them in if the doctor agreed that they weren't emotionally capable of taking care of themselves in whether that's with respect to self-harm or suicide or mental capacity in general. That the legislation changed then that the person had to sign themselves in. So as long as the person could say no, there was nothing anyone could do, really.
Right.
And that's still the case. If an adult, so not even if an adult, if a person over the age of 18 who was expressing suicidal ideation, self-harm, or even suicidal attempt, I suppose until they actually make an attempt, there is no real powers for anyone to get them the care they require to be better. So in my dad's case, we managed barely to convince him to sign himself into a mental hospital for mental illness. And he spent about 4 months there throughout that kind of winter of 20, what was it, 3 years and 5 years, 2012. So yeah, he spent a couple of months there. He came home for Christmas, and he was a very shook person to what I remember from prior to his spiral. But he still seemed to have a different perspective on things. And when he finally returned home about kind of February of 2013, he had a new lease on life, which was kind of, as I said, it was a different version of my dad than I remembered, I suppose, because he was finally getting the treatment he needed. But part of the condition of bipolar is that when someone who has this is a part of a number of mental health conditions, but this is just my experience with bipolar. When someone feels well, they feel they no longer need the support that got them well. So one of those supports happened to be medication. So he stopped taking his medication and continued the cycle that he had been on for the previous kind of 30 years. So there was a cycle basically where he would seek help from his GP, be given a medication, start counselling. The counselling would go to a point he wouldn't be able to get past. He then would feel better anyway because he's been on medication and went, oh, all is right with the world, I don't need medication anymore. And then within a couple of months he'd be on the same spiral again, or on the same cycle again. So it was like if you can imagine a sinusoidal rhythm almost, not necessarily as regular, but there was certainly a cycle to it, and an internal cycle to his behaviour surrounding that as well. So he was a complex individual, to say the least, but an extremely loving man. And just he would have arguments in his head with people that he hadn't spoken to, and then the argument would have concluded in a particular manner in his head. He'd have that conversation with someone, and they would go a completely wrong way, and then he'd be kind of wouldn't know where to go because it was the scenario had spiraled in a different direction to what he was expecting, I suppose. And that was all part of the condition as well. That there was a lot of negative self-talk, and a lot of beating himself up over things that weren't necessarily in his control. So he in turn lost friendships from that, and through that then lost support. So it was looking back on it was tough to be in the situation with him. It was tough to watch, and you can't really advise him because one way or another the sad fact is he's an adult and he's going to make his own decisions anyway. So and we can obviously further discuss that with respect to his death as well. Really clever guy. Could have written a master's on tying flies for fly fishing. He was just everything he was passionate about. He was ultra passionate about. And he was. I'm still kind of struggling. I'm 3 years down the line from his passing, and I still do struggle regularly to try and differentiate him from his death. His death was quite traumatic for me, so it's hard to kind of separate him from his death. But that being said, more and more I am able to do that. So
thanks for sharing that, Eoin. A lot to unpack. The first thing that I'd like to ask is, how do you think this has? How do you think your father's state of being impacted your own emotional development? And another thing is, it may sound silly, but just from my own point of view, it took me, I don't know what age I was, but it took me a while to really start to look at my parents, my father, like a man, rather than just, oh, that's my parent. And if you know what I mean, and can I ask, when was this when did you start taking this kind of understanding what he's going through, rather than, oh, why is my dad acting so strange? Or
when did my perspective of him change?
Yeah.
So I suppose to answer the first question, just give me the first question one more time.
Well, how do you think that his state of being during your adolescence affected your own emotional development?
Affected me. Yeah. I suppose because there was a certain volatility with his moods. If things were going right, things were going very well, and there was a bit of a mania with that. And with the mania, there was quite an impulsive nature, but bizarrely quite rewarding for us, because if he was in good humor, we were allowed to be in good humor, and then we would get ice cream, and we might get a magazine in the shop, or he might take a fishing or whatever. So
I guess.
that was, but due to the bipolar, there's an equal, well, the equal measure, but there's an equal swing in the balance with the depressive episodes as well. So similarly, when he was in depressive episode, we were walking on eggshells. We couldn't do anything right. Well, just one instance that comes to mind when he was particularly down. A couple of Christmases before he was first diagnosed was that I was in college. I had very little money, and I came home to Christmas, and I said, "Look, I want to cook dinner on Christmas Eve. That's my present to you. It's all I can do, So I bought lovely duck breast, and I prepared the whole meal, and I dished it up. And there was myself, my younger brother, my mother, and my father sitting at the table. At this stage, my dad's relationship with my older brother was virtually non-existent. And we were just chatting about things, and my dad started saying something about something. He was expressing his perspective on the world at the time, saying, "Oh, nothing's any good. This winter's going to go on forever," or that kind of stuff. And I just turned around to him and said, "Look, you know right well that the evening's going to get longer any day soon." And he literally almost jumped across the table at me and said, "Do you think that's all it is?" And I, in my immaturity, but also I think at the time I responded quite well and said, "Excuse the expletive now," but I said, "I fucking know that's not all it is." And my mother went, "Stop," and I left the table.
Okay.
And I suppose I get into the complexity of my mother's relationship with him as well, from my perspective as well. I have a feeling she's going to be listening to this now when it's finished. So I don't want to diminish her capability in any way, shape, or form, because she's a wonderful, wonderful person and admirably strong. But yeah, there was that volatility with respect to my dad that in turn I developed an anxiety around making decisions and keeping people happy, and I fell into a trap of lying quite regularly. I would lie to try and keep the peace. And that's a habit I'm only now overcoming. It was something that just for years and years and years they would appear to be white lies, but they were ultimately they weren't. I was lying to myself as much as I was lying to everyone else, and I was doing more damage to myself than I realized. So yeah, I suppose that's one thing. There was an anxiety. There was the habit of lying. I'm not great with money. I'm starting to become great with money, but because of my dad's mania and then depressive episodes, there was swinging responsibility with regard to money. When he was on a high, he would happily buy a new fishing reel worth €120, but wouldn't then buy us ice cream because, if the following week or 2 weeks later, because he then realized he spent money on something that he didn't really need or couldn't use for the next winter, he would be on a depressive episode and then wouldn't buy us an ice cream. Or I'm being flippant about the items he's buying for us now.
No.
Yeah.
Sounds like we ate an awful lot of ice cream, but he wouldn't, he wouldn't be as wouldn't be as open to spending money, and in turn, I think that led to a certain amount he built up quite a bit of debt before. When I say quite a bit of debt now, it wasn't anything major, but before he died, he had amassed a small amount of debt that he shouldn't have, because he wasn't employed at the time. He was mismanaging his money alongside mismanaging his own mental health at the time as well. So yeah, it was quite sad in some respects to see him go down the path he did. I suppose around the time that he passed away, or a few months before he passed away, he would have moved out of the family home. Through no kind of agreement between him and my mother, he just made a choice and found an apartment, or found a small cottage. Moved in there, brought all his dogs with him, brought most of his fishing gear, was trying to set up a business to occupy his time. And but he had removed one of the last supporting elements in his life, which was my mother, his wife. So he, at every opportunity, he wanted to be independent, but didn't realize that he needed support as well. So he actually died at at our home house. He was preparing. Bizarrely, he was preparing dinner with my mother at the time, and didn't get an answer to a question he wanted an answer to, and then stepped outside the door, and that was it. This is one of the scenarios, I suppose, where he would have had a conversation in his head, and it would have come out a particular way, and it didn't come out the way he was expecting. So his reaction was to the extreme. But only after the fact I realised, after speaking to people, he had, so along with his conservation, he ran a little syndicate for a group of friends of his that enjoyed hunting. So they would have, during the leading up to the hunting season, from kind of November 1st to January 31st, there's a winter hunting season in Ireland for game birds, along the lines of partridge, pheasants, that kind of stuff. So he would have raised a number of pheasants for this syndicate. But leading up to his death, he actually sold the birds that he had about a week before he died. He had gotten rid of them. So I only learned this after the fact. So that apparently is a kind of a thing that happens for people who have a plan. For people who have a plan to die, they start putting their affairs in order as best they can. Start saying goodbye. Like the phone call to me was one of those. I spoke to him about 2 weeks before he died. He rang me and said, kind of saying, how are things going? He told me, treat your girlfriend better than I treated your mother, and that was something that he'd never said to me before, and it worried me. So I asked him at the time, quite outright, as outright as I could, with the limited knowledge I had at the time. I said, "Are you going to hurt yourself?" And he said, "No, I'm fine. And I said, "Okay, look, let's make a plan. Over the next week, I'm going to drive up to you. We're going to go for coffee. I'm out of work at the moment. We can spend some time together now." And he went, "Yeah, that sounds good." And sadly, I hadn't spoken to him in the following 2 weeks, and he passed away. So there was to answer your question, I suppose the anxiety, the lying, the mismanagement of money. There's a lot of things that I'm realizing were habits that I formed from his. I suppose to put there's a psychological CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy theory called I'll come back to it, but it basically, there's 3 ego states in ourselves. There's a child ego state, the parent ego state, and the adult ego state. And I suppose my dad wouldn't have developed an adult ego state. He was always flipping between the parent and the child, and that was something I developed in myself. That I'm realizing now that I'm flipping between the parent and adult ego state, or parent and child ego state, more than I'm spending in the adult ego state. The adult ego state is very much present and about compromise and about understanding, whereas the other two are always either wanting to be right or wanting to be proven right. Anyway, I digress. But
no. You said something. You said 2 things there that really kind of hit a chord. The first was that you would say white lies to keep the peace, or what you thought were white lies, just to let things go, to make things easier on everyone else. And that hit a chord with me. I think I've done that before. My sister definitely done that before. I think most people have done that within their family. It's only when things kind of come apart that you then realize how much of a toll those little white lies have on you as a person, and that you actually I found out that some of the things I didn't think I was building them up at all, but you find out that actually they build up, and it almost forms some sort of resentment to whichever person you actually trying to cover for in the first place. And I think that's something that until you said it, I never really thought of, to be quite honest. And I think there's so many people who are listening to this who probably do that. And I think maybe it's just I just want to highlight that point to say, look, if you are doing that, maybe it doesn't mean you have to have an argument in that moment, but just bring up those problems and address them as they come, rather than trying to, cover up. And then the second thing you said was, which I find isn't kind of unique to just suicidal thoughts, but just to a depression state in general, is it's this awful curse that makes you retreat from everyone else, and it isolates yourself. In a way, there's almost this haunting. It's almost hauntingly beautiful how it does it. That it knows that the only savior you've got is actually your connections with people, and somehow it manages to make you break those connections of your own will. And I just wondered if you, with your expertise and HUGG, if there are any certain ways that you have found that work and maybe can help people steer away from that, and when they notice that they're starting to seclude themselves, to actually do the opposite and push themselves back into the arms of their loved ones. I know Jim has a quote, it's one of his favorite quotes, which is it's not the survival of the fittest, it's the survival of the nurtured. And I think that kind of quote really kind of encapsulates maybe the problems that your dad was facing and many others face. Are there any things any steps that you have in place that you teach at HUGG to maybe help people who are kind of going down that road?
I suppose the space we create in HUGG is a space of non-judgment and understanding that what you're feeling there's nothing wrong with how you're feeling being bereaved by suicide. It may seem wrong to someone who has never been bereaved by suicide because they don't have the perspective. And then that in turn can kind of fuel self-stigmatization around it as well. But primarily, there's the safety of the space we create kind of magnetizes the group a bit, and you'll find that people, when they're active, I suppose, firstly, grief isn't linear. That's one thing I've learned, that there's nothing. The 5 stages of grief, or whatever, I can't remember how many stages there are, but they don't happen stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
They happen as stage 1, then stage 3, then stage 5, and then back to 2, and then back to 1. And like the grief journey is in some respects can be persistent for, like, I mean, I'm 3.5 years down the line. I'm still grieving at times. There's a lot more times that I'm not. There's a lot more times that I can enjoy. Like I've learned to while that it's okay to be happy sometimes. It's okay to smile. It's okay to laugh. There's a certain amount of judgment that people will put on themselves when they're experiencing grief, that they're not allowed. They should be always depressed because they've lost their loved one. No, because like you said, nothing is permanent. Everything is always in flux and change. And I suppose we create a nurturing space, like Jim's quote there was, none of us are fit by ourselves to grieve alone. So we create a space that's nurturing to grieve productively. But in saying that, we give a space where people have permission to say things that they wouldn't be able to say outside of the space, that they wouldn't be able to. I remember, I'm just getting kind of flashbacks to my own grief while in that space, and I was quite often I was saying, fuck him. Why the fuck did he do that? Like, what, why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? And all the what ifs and the crystal clear perspective we have after the fact of, we start to dissect every kind of moment that we experienced leading up to it. Why didn't I go to have coffee with him? Why didn't I check in on him more often? Why didn't? Because I suppose in some respects he had set up a scenario that I didn't want to be listening to him all the time, because I had enough of it. I had 30 years of it, before he passed away. And there's a certain amount of guilt with that people can't, particularly on the death by suicide. There's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame in feeling hurt. And we want to love the person who's died, but we also want to hate them because they've done something to us. They've injured us in the process. And that's where the stigma around being selfish and comes in. The thing is, I never thought my dad to be selfish. There was times that he was self-centered, certainly, but his decision wasn't to. I don't think his decision was to set out to really injure anyone. He couldn't cope with the inner turmoil in himself and didn't see another way out, and couldn't cope with the pain. Really, he was in an immense amount of emotional pain that couldn't be measured by any of us, and also couldn't be remedied by any of us. The power was in his hands. I suppose that's the other paradox with my dad was he had a library of self-help books, but couldn't help himself. He had all this knowledge, but couldn't connect the dots, or couldn't find the pathway that because in his case he had a diagnosable mental health condition that required medication, and he that was beyond his understanding. So yeah, to answer your question, I can't remember what your question was. I digressed too much.
No, it's just about the survival of the fittest and the people who lose contact, because that's what depression does, be it whether you're suicidal or just just depressed generally. It kind of makes you do that, makes you seclude yourself and become isolated, which I suppose in quarantine is even more apparent how much we miss that human contact. I think people take it so for granted. I for one, just personally, I hate FaceTime. I find it really annoying. I think it's useless. I like to just put my AirPods in, then I can talk to people while I'm doing other things. However, now that I'm in quarantine and I'm only seeing, my girlfriend's face, which is beautiful as it is, seeing that for 6 weeks, day after day, sometimes I now want to use FaceTime to talk to people, to see other faces, and we take that so for granted, and I just think that's such an important point. And something that you've done, and I'm not sure if you've done it knowingly, but I've always had a problem with this idea that when someone passes away, we have to eulogize about them, and we have to we have to talk about them as if they were this angel, this perfect human being, which of course we all know, no matter how good that person was, and maybe some of them were close to being angels, no matter how good that person was, they all have their faults because they're human beings. And you were talking about how there's this stigma that as a suicide, I'm not sure if the word is suicide victim, but someone who survived suicide, suicide, is that you're not supposed to be angry at that person. You should only be like loving, and you should only talk about the best parts of them. And I think even at the start of this podcast, when you spoke about your dad, obviously you told us about the great parts of him, the fishing, his interests, his hobbies, that he was he's a funny man, and all the rest of the stuff. But I think it's also, whether it's suicide or not, if someone passes away, I think we should have the sensibility to be able to keep their memory alive, but keep their full memory alive. And if that means that sometimes you go, oh, you know what, like my dad was a real pain in the ass, or he couldn't really take a joke that well, or he was a terrible cook, or whatever it may be, do you know what I mean? You always get the thing of, oh, he was the life and soul of the party. And I always feel like, how many people are the life and soul of the party in reality? There's not that many, but you hear that line every time someone passes away, and I just think there's no need for that anymore. I think you've done it beautifully, to be honest, is we should really talk about people honestly, how they were, and obviously let's focus on the good points, of course, but let's not make out that they were these amazing human beings, they were perfect angels, because none of us are that. And I think when we do that, that's what you're saying, it kind of makes it shuts down that topic, it shuts down that conversation, because you said like, oh fuck him, you're angry at him at certain points, but if you said that to someone out loud, people would be like in horror that you're speaking like you're saying fuck you to your dad. I mean, are you crazy? It's like, well, no, these are human feelings, and like he was a troubled man, just like we all are. I think it's really important that we kind of just highlight that.
Even in Ireland, Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
I was just going to say, in Ireland, you always hear as well, don't speak ill of the dead. You know, even if, oh no, I need to express this. This is how I feel right now. You know, it can be somewhat frustrating, I can imagine.
Well, it doesn't help it.
No.
I think Irish society has grown dramatically, particularly in the last 20 years, with regard to mental health, and around suicide. But for, like, my dad grew up in a time when suicide was illegal. You know that suicide, if someone died by suicide, they weren't allowed to be buried in consecrated ground, and they weren't allowed a funeral. Which fueled stigma even further. You know, so and that stigma still lives today. That you know, in Ireland, through around every around every death, there's a what's the word? A coroner's court sitting to an inquest. Sorry, that's the word I'm looking for. Where the circumstances of the death are discussed and a determination is made for the death certificate, particularly around unexplained death. So what does happen quite regularly in Ireland is people can be quite ashamed by how their loved one died, and sadly, quite often they'll ask that the verdict is made without the phrase "suicide," "died by suicide" in it. That they'll go for death by misadventure, or there's a couple of other kind of phrases that would be put on a death certificate that don't say suicide, but quite often, quite likely are, and that in turn fuels stigma even further as well. And then, as Jim was saying there about both you were saying about the person being eulogized and made out to be the greatest human being potentially, or I discussed it with one of the group members recently about he was a tortured soul, or he was there's a lot of those kind of platitudes that people say because they think that it's going to bring you comfort. But quite often it either diminishes the impact that their death has had, or diminishes the impact the person actually had in their life.
Yeah.
So the stigma that does kind of surround suicide. I suppose that's part of my volunteering with HUGG, is that I can break that down where possible. You know, that I can tell people, look, people have died by suicide for as long as people have lived. It's a sad fact that it's part of the human condition. It would be wonderful to not have it happen. But I can't say it never will. You know. I don't know if you're into your gaming at all, but I recently started playing on a very much an aside. I recently started playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is based in ancient Greece, and during one of the loading scenes, there's little hints and tips and bits of information that appear, and one of the bits of information is bizarrely about death by suicide in ancient Greece. That back then it was considered sacrilegious, and you were not allowed to be buried on consecrated ground. So it goes, like, the stigma around it is as old as the event itself. So it's we haven't changed all that much in 2,500 years, you know.
No. And 2 points. You brought up actually the inquest that happens after the death, and I was just doing a bit of research on the Samaritans page, and I came about the same kind of research. And it said, for example, this is of 2018. In the UK Republic of Ireland, there were 6,859 suicides in 2018. In the UK, there were 6,507, and in the Republic of Ireland, 352. However, it then went on to say kind of what you said, which was actually those numbers are conservative, because for one off is that apparently in Ireland and in the UK, these the death is only actually put in as a figure once the inquest has been done, and that doesn't that's not necessarily a quick process. In Scotland apparently it only happens in 8 days, but in the UK and Ireland that can happen. It can take up to a year, if not longer, sometimes, until you get that rubber stamp, so to speak, on that certificate. So that's why I couldn't get 2019 ones, because even though we're in April 2020, there will still be people who have died of suicide, in 2019 who haven't got that certificate yet to say so. And I just think that's just crazy to think that that there's such a stigma attached. And then lastly, the point that you're saying about the Greece, it said on the Samaritans thing, it said, and it's true, only recently, you were telling us before this podcast that we shouldn't say committing suicide. And you said, and I want you to just elaborate on that further. But only recently that was actually a crime, was to commit suicide. It was illegal to do so, which I always found so counterintuitive anyway, because what are they going to do anyway? They can't do anything with you. But only recently was it a crime. So we're not, almost forget ancient Greece. We're talking the last 20, 30 years. This was actually a legal crime. And do you just want to explain to people about why we shouldn't use the phrase committing suicide? Because I never had thought of it, and I don't think Jim had either. And it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I suppose the phrase, particularly in Ireland, a lot of the laws that started at the founding of the state. I mean, firstly, our country as a republic is only 100 years old, or less than 100 years old. At the founding of the state, a lot of the laws were adopted either from the UK or from the Catholic Church. I'm not going to go on a Catholic Church bashing round now. I'm going to limit it to one point where the phrase, or in canon law, someone who dies by suicide is considered a sinner. And I suppose that was extrapolated from 2,500 years ago, that they weren't allowed to be buried where in consecrated ground. They weren't allowed to have a church funeral. And the phrase committing implied that a crime was committed. But the only victim is the person who's died. So the crime, no other crime fits that description, that the only victim is the person who has been who committed that crime. I'm not going to steal from myself. If I'm going to embezzle money, I'm going to embezzle it from a corporation.
Yeah, of course.
If I'm going to steal something from a shop, I'm going to steal. The shop is the victim. If God forbid I was in a car accident, the victim is someone else. Yes, I might be.
You're never the perpetrator and the victim at the same time.
Except when it came to suicide previously. Yeah.
Of course.
So it was, but yeah, that would have come from a place of fear and stigma. And I suppose before my dad passed away, I would have used the phrase committed suicide because that's what I knew of it. But essentially the word committed implies that a crime has been committed. But as I said, the only victim is the person who has died by suicide. And in turn, I try to use the phrase died by suicide because it's stating a fact. Or if you find that difficult to get your head around, just be factual about it. They died by suicide. They killed themselves. Yes, it's emotive language, but it's the truth. Whereas the phrase committed implies that judgment has been made on this person, when realistically they're a victim themselves.
Thanks for clearing that up, man. I just wanted to ask, can you tell me how your relationship with yourself and others changed after your father's passing?
My relationship with myself changed by me listening to myself, in the sense that I along with that habit of lying, I was telling myself lies quite often as well. So I started, it's taken 3 years, and I'm by no means a perfectionist at it. I started listening to myself and started being mindful of what was causing me to feel a particular physical emotion, anxiety in my chest, fast breathing, and or stress headaches, or I just tried to, as I said, I by saying it in a podcast, it sounds like he's got it all together. I can assure you, I am by no means an expert. I'm lucky to practice a bit of gratitude once a week, but that can be enough to kind of to allow my perspective to be a bit more real, I suppose, and less in my head. My relationship with other people, that's a tougher question, because around a death you get a lot of support from everyone you've ever met, or everyone you've ever had a moment with. So, like, I had friends from college traveling half the country to come see me after my dad had died, but through no fault of their own and through no fault of mine, I haven't really spoken to them since, and that's 3 years ago. And that's just because life goes on. And I don't blame them for that. I was so grateful that they came. And if I heard that a parent of theirs passed away, I'd be down there tomorrow. Because there's a love and a relationship there that meant a lot at a time. It doesn't mean the same thing now, but there's a certain amount of respect and love to be had at the time of a death. But since the death, yes, a lot of the relationships have fallen by the wayside. Some through literal physical distance, and living very different lives. Some through having had less distance and just people not wanting to be around you because you're depressing them, sadly. Because I'm someone who's quite vocal about the impact my dad's death has had on me, but more so now positively than negatively. In the beginning, it impacted me negatively massively, because I was grieving a job loss. That I had lost a job 3 weeks before he died. I was grieving his death. I was grieving the loss. I was grieving the loss of my dad first and foremost, and then the suicide of my dad second. And that it can be such a traumatic experience. Like, I wasn't near the house when it happened. I wasn't. I was living in Dublin. They were in the Midlands. I had to drive for an hour and a half to get there. In the fear and grief that encapsulates after a phone call like that, I got my older brother was the one who rang me, actually, because I suppose the way it happened. My dad passed away. My mother was in the vicinity and found him pretty quickly. The only person she could think to call was my older brother. He had to call the Gardaí. He had to call the ambulance. He then had to call me. He tried to call my younger brother. My younger brother was at rugby training. The guards went to pick him up, and he was. It was a funny story, but when he saw the guards there, hoping to talk to him, he was thinking, "Jesus, what have I done? What have I done?" and he got a flashback to disposing of the household waste in the rugby club bins. And he was thinking, "Shit, have I been caught on camera?" And the guards are coming to tell me not to do it again. So it was very different, but that was his perspective on things at the time. But like I probably shouldn't have driven that night, but I needed to get home and to just see my mother and grieve with her and ensure that she was still in one piece, not emotionally, but physically she was still in one piece. My older brother, as I said, was in Spain. He was actually training. So he wasn't back for another 24 hours. So and now he was training he was part of the military, so he was training over there. He had his brothers in arms around him, but it's not the same as having your family around you. And also because of his relationship with my dad, I can't imagine how he grieved or because we haven't spoken about it really. And that's another thing I'll get onto if we have time. The different ways that families grieve. So the relationships with other people. I suppose I'm still protective of my mother. I wouldn't tell her everything. I would tell her most things, but I wouldn't tell her everything. I do still have a bit of fear of people leaving me, in the sense that or of loss. I have a fear of losing things and losing people. So it certainly has impacted my relationship with my girlfriend. But we're lucky enough. We're in counselling ourselves to try and bring back what we had in the beginning of our relationship. We're together 10 years. It's a long time, and we've had so many life events that not we've had a foster child, we've had her loved ones of hers pass away, loved ones of mine pass away, and all the other life events that happen, and we're still together. So I'm grateful, very much grateful for that. But yeah, there's an analogy that's used around suicide. It's like a grenade going off in a family, and that everyone is hit with shrapnel, different size pieces, different numbers of pieces, and they have to tend to those wounds differently. So they're all grieving the same death, but grieving it so differently. And then the other side of it is that they actually say that it radiates out to up to I think up to 100 people, or is it 180 people are impacted by each death by suicide. So if you go off the Irish statistics, what's 350 times nearly 200? You've got 70,000 people every year are directly impacted by a suicide.
Yeah, and you brought up
that's my HUGG was set up. So yeah.
Yeah, you brought up a point as well, which I've spoken to my friends about, and it's not. I don't think it only pertains to suicide. I think it's just a thing that in death is that someone dies and you get that immediate flock of friendship and love and support, and then like you said, look, life goes on. But the thing that rankled with me in that is that you are expected to go back to normality straight away. For example, at my office, I had last year. My nan passed away just of old age, and then 2 days later, that was in England. I'm working in Madrid at the time. My nan's passed away, and then 2 days later, my uncle in Italy passed away, and that was quite unexpected. He wasn't, he's 60 odd. He wasn't really. We weren't expecting to put it that way. And the company policy was you have 4 days. And I said to my boss, I said, look, I'll come into work, like it is what it is. And my boss said, look, and luckily my boss he happened to be a friend as well. And he said, you take as much time as you need. If you take 3 weeks, if you take a month, it is what it is. Like you've had 2 deaths in the space of 2 days. There's one day and then the next day. But the problem, what's weird is that you get that immediate flock. And I had so many people, work colleagues and so on, saying, oh, blah, blah, blah. The week after, no one checked in. 2 weeks after, no one checked in. 3, and do you know what I mean? And that to some extent, I understand it because look, you can't have people doting on you every second of the day. They have their own lives and they have their own problems. But I also think that we need to, you were talking about the steps of grief that you might go from 1 to 3 to 5 to 2 to 4 to 2 again and back. I, for example, I'm not even sure if I have grieved my nan, and it's been a year just because of circumstances, and I'm almost waiting for that moment to come. But no one asks you. They just ask you on that first day, or they ask you at the funeral, and then that's it. And I think if we can really, I try my best and I fail sometimes at it, but I don't want to come across as a preacher on the podcast, but I do try my best to, if I know someone's had a difficult time, whether it's been a grief or whether it's just been they've had a bit, they lost a job or something along those lines, to check in at the moment, and then check in every so often, every couple of weeks. How you doing, pal? You're right. Let's have a call, so on and so forth, to make sure that they know that you're there. Because like you said, you can bounce back from one thing to the other. And one week you might be perfect. And then the next week you watch a film or you listen to a song. And before you know it, you're back into the depths of grief again. And none of your friends are asking you anymore. And you don't want, it almost feels selfish to kind of go out to your friends, guys, I'm still dealing with this, because you don't want to, like you said, you don't want to put down on on your friends, and so you kind of internalize once again, and then the vicious cycle starts all over. I just think it's a really important point that you brought up there, which I think so many of us deal with, and I think we've all realized it, but yet none of us seem to kind of want to bring that out in the open.
Yeah, absolutely. Grief. Well, firstly, I don't think a lot of people realize what we actually grieve on a daily basis. At the moment we're grieving our ability to go out and to the beach, which is 10 miles away. We're grieving our ability and freedom at the moment. And that can, if you don't acknowledge it, that can have a pretty negative impact. And in tandem with that, there's a lot of people grieving job losses. There's a lot of people grieving family members. The death toll hasn't tapered by any means from this virus. There's so many griefs, and And then there's going to be we'll say the financial grief, the economic grief that's going to happen. And I suppose I use the word grief from a point of view of losses, that there are so many things that we are losing each day, and we're made hyper aware of it, particularly with the media. That at the end of this, when we have the freedom to grieve, people aren't going to necessarily know how to. I think that's the other thing, is that, and that comes back to, I suppose, resilience. When my dad passed away, I didn't have the resilience to grieve by myself. I needed support, and I suppose now that we have a lot of time to think and to make ourselves aware of these things, it could be a time to practice gratitude and resilience, or to find some opportunity there to maybe to learn some resilience and strengthen our own emotional foundation. Just on that point, there is another group that I am involved with called HUGG. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but essentially what they call it is it's a gym for your mental health. So every Monday they have an online space at the moment. They actually have a physical space in across the UK and Ireland, where men of various ages, backgrounds, job situations, life situations come together in a non-judgmental space to literally exercise their emotions around a particular topic each week. It's only an hour every Monday. I'll send you on the link after this, and feel free to check it out. But where it spawned from was that we're constantly told to, it's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to speak. But where do we speak? Where can we go to actually say that I'm not okay? And that's where this came from. It was a safe space to do that, and I suppose that's what HUGG is as well. HUGG is a place where people can say the things that aren't politically correct to say in public, and to grieve in ways that surrounded by people who understand and there's an empathy there that sadly you're not going to get it walking down the street, because people have their own shit to be dealing with. So
yeah. No, lovely. Yeah.
You mentioned before how you were the only man of 8, I think, when you guys were starting HUGG, and I was also what comes to mind after this is I was talking to a friend a few months ago who told me that his stepdad's father was recently diagnosed with severe depression. And when my friend's stepdad asked him, Dad, like, why didn't you say anything to me? He said, son, I didn't know what to say. I mean, I've been feeling like this for 25, 30 years. And then I remember when I brought up this point with my dad who said, son, I think everybody's a little bit depressed. And I was wondering, have you seen any effective means of kind of maybe facilitating a changing perspective of elderly men with mental health?
I think, well, from the little bit I know of the Men's Sheds group, or Men's Sheds movement, that is a massive avenue for a healthy outlet for men, because more men will talk about their emotions sitting side by side at a bar with a pint in their hand, looking at the barman and talking to each other, and they will sitting across the table, or sitting in a room across from a counsellor, or sitting around the table. Men, we haven't been taught how to express ourselves, really. Like girls from a very young age are told, well, I don't know if they're told, I think it's a societal thing that from a very young age, girls express themselves more and are facilitated in that. It's probably a new form of sexism, maybe. I don't think men are allowed to be emotional.
Well, we're held to this standard, aren't we? We're held to a standard of, you know, from a very young age. What did you play with? You play with action men, and what are action men? They're these heroes, they're these soldiers that can go around, and they're these brutes, even in a little plastic form with the rippling muscles and so on. And then it goes on from there, and we're held to this standard. And you know, my dad, as I've spoken about a million times, and I love my dad, and there's so many good points that he's tried to bring up, instill in me. But one of the things, and he didn't necessarily tell me outright, but something that he just instilled with me in the way that he acted, the way that he went about his life, is men are there for everyone else, and we deal with our own shit at the end of the day. But first of all, you know, help your mother out, make sure she's okay. Help your sister out, make sure she's okay. Help your friends out, make sure they're okay. Help your girlfriend out, make sure she's okay. And then at the end of all of that, like with some sort of fucking superhero, at the end of all of that, then you come to the end of the day, and then you deal with your own shit. But the key to all of that is you deal with your own shit on your own. And whilst I think it's a noble ambition, I think it's flawed from the outset, and I think it's impossible to do. I think about my dad. My dad lost his mum, and he was incredibly close to his mum. We never saw him cry. None of us did. That's not to say he didn't cry. Maybe he did, but the fact that if he did, he felt that he had to do it in private because he had to, be strong for the rest of his family. That's the crippling aspect of being a man. And I think, my friend always talks about it, that we have to unlearn certain things. And I think that's one of the key things with us, is that with men, be it from all ages, is that we really have to unlearn this whole thing, this thing of crying is weak, showing emotion is weak. Because actually, I've really, the more that I have these podcast conversations, or just conversations in person, the more I find that actually, if you can show your true self, and with all the vulnerabilities that exist, then that's being truly strong. Making out that we're these macho men and that we're infallible and nothing bothers us is something that's laughable, because we all know it's not the case. We all know that it's a great act, but none of us are actually that happy. And so I just think the more that we become truthful with ourselves first, then with others, it brings out more conversations. Jim and I have been doing this podcast for a couple of months, and we have conversations with people like yourself who are brave to have these conversations out in person. But what I really love about these conversations is, after every episode, I get a couple of messages from different friends who have said, "Oh," and then they open up about this topic that they've just listened to, and that's what this is all about. It's just that if you have these conversations outright, you don't know who's listening, but when they listen, they might feel kind of entitled to then have that same conversation, be it with you or with someone else in their own household. And I just think if we can kind of really unlearn what we've learned and learn that new skill and take it from women, because women talk about their feelings, and also what I find as well, and I'm not sure if you've seen this in HUGG, men's natural instinct is to fix things. So there's a problem, let's fix it. Okay, so what you need to do, man, because you're a bit depressed. Okay, cool. So you need to go out for runs, you need to do this, you need to do that, blah blah. But yet when I talk to my friends that are girlfriends, they sometimes don't say a word. They just sit there and they listen. And sometimes that's all I need, And if we can take that on from women, and we can learn those traits, then I think as a human population, we would be so much better off for it.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the other beauties of having a safe space like HUGG, is to give permission to discuss the things that we can't discuss outside, but that empowers people then to start discussing it outside. I suppose for the first couple of months after my dad's death, I was seeing a one-to-one counselor, and then I wouldn't necessarily express what I had discussed in the session with my girlfriend, who was the closest human being to me, physically and emotionally, because I didn't want her to worry. But yeah. I was in turn denying myself the permission to be not okay. And then when I started with HUGG, that once again gave me another kind of empowerment to start talking about this and giving others then outside of HUGG permission to discuss it. And I think the stigma is that we're not allowed. We're not allowed to discuss suicide. We're not allowed to discuss grief because we don't want to upset anyone else. But the way I see it is, everyone is going to be upset by a grief at some point in their life. For some cases, it's a traumatic grief surrounding suicide. It could be a traumatic grief around God knows what else. Any lost loved one. I mean, you name it, it's traumatic to someone. I suppose it's just about giving permission to be able to do that a little more publicly. I mean, I don't mean going down O'Connell Street in Dublin, or I don't know, name a main street in London and professing your love for the person who's died. It's not about doing that. It's not about a grand gesture. It's just about being able to sit beside someone and be upset. Because, as you said, like the laundry list of self-help tips can't dry your tears. You could probably use it to dry your tears, but that's really all the use it's going to be if it's written down in front of you. Sadly, at that moment in time, when you express that you're depressed to someone, you're not expressing it looking for help, because you probably potentially already sought help from a professional. You're looking for understanding, and you're looking for someone to just sit with you in it.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Eoin. Aside from encouraging sharing amongst people, your close friends, and the groups that you host at HUGG, are there any other pieces of advice you would give to someone who is experiencing suicidal thoughts, or is really feeling that they're going through a tough time and they don't see an end?
Having had a sense of hopelessness myself, reach out to someone you trust. It doesn't have to be a loved one, because bizarrely enough, we don't always trust our loved ones. Just someone you trust who can just sit with you in it. That's what we've fostered in the HUGG, is that we can sit with people in their grief, and they can feel that hopelessness, and then be told afterwards, this will pass. And sometimes being alone isn't going to solve any kind of heavy emotional weight, like depression, like suicidal ideation, like intrusive thought. And the other thing is, sometimes if you do seek help, it's not going to be right the first time, but it doesn't mean you should give up.
Yeah.
There are a lot of exceptional professionals out there, and there's a few who aren't. And sometimes you come across someone who's not the right fit for you. It's okay to try a different therapist. It's okay to try a different doctor or GP. It's okay to speak to a different family member than the first time you tried. And yeah, I think, and then if you're the person being asked, don't be afraid to try not to be afraid to ask the outright question of, are you going to kill yourself? Because that then opens a permission to talk about it. And if the question, like someone who is feeling suicidal, they don't fear saying that they're suicidal. What they fear is they either fear the death, or they're worrying about other people. They're worrying about what other people think. They're instead of discussing it, they're worrying and fretting and potentially. I mean, I can only go from my own perspective. I was worrying about other people, that I was at the time, that I was a burden. That I sure, look at my dad could do it, I can do it. Well, it was where my head was going, and I luckily sought help. That sense of hopelessness is momentary. It could be 5 minutes, it could be an hour, but it's not going to last for 24/7. And I suppose it's acknowledging that, okay, maybe I am feeling this way. Maybe I don't have the support in my immediacy, but I need help, and this will pass. Yeah, I suppose I can't advise more than my own experience.
Of course.
The other side of it as well is, I suppose, is for people who are worried about their loved ones, like educate yourself wherever you can, and get forearmed is forewarned. So you're by educating yourself, you can then be a resource. Obviously, you've got an issue of distance, but words can travel miles because we're in 3 different parts of the world discussing this right now. Yeah, education is that's the other one thing that we're bringing into HUGG is to try and educate people around their own grief, around the grief within their families, within the family groups, and to just kind of further the message that everyone is grieving something, and at some point in their lives. I mean, as a child, you might grieve not getting the Christmas present you wanted. There's a loss in that. It's obviously not necessarily a complex loss, but it's a loss. It's about education, speaking and exploring the issues that we come across each day. I digress.
No, perfect. And just lastly, before we finish off with the how to get your shit together, are there any books, videos, music, films, or anything like that? Any sort of material that you have found useful, or that you would recommend for someone who either themselves is experiencing suicidal thoughts, or maybe is looking out for someone who is experiencing suicidal thoughts?
I suppose one book I've read. I actually listened to the audiobook. I have read the actual hard copy here somewhere. I haven't read it, but I've listened to it. A book called "How Not to Give a Fuck."
How not to
give a fuck.
I
don't remember the author's name, but there was a couple of it's not a big book. There's a couple of key things that stuck with me out of it. Simple theories, but they've allowed me to expand my understanding in other ways. Music. What's good for a good cry is Freya writing. There was I listened to the radio a lot in the car, and I there was this particular scenario where the radio station were hosting a wedding. They sourced everything for a couple that won the prize, and they managed to get Freya Ridings to sing at their wedding. And she sang one of her songs live, and I'd never heard it before. And I was driving down the road, and I burst into tears. But I ended up laughing at myself, saying, "How was I so impacted by this song?"
Yeah.
And it's a song about I think the story behind it was she lost a breakdown of a relationship, and the loved one was basically stepping onto a train and going on a tour of some kind, or a trip of some kind, and it was that breakdown of a relationship. So in turn, lost, and it just whatever the tone of her voice just really set me off. But I suppose in general, music in general is a great outlet for feelings, for me, particularly a lot of the angry ones I felt. Actually, about 3 months after my dad passed away, I'm a bit of a metalhead. So for my birthday, my girlfriend had gotten me tickets to Avenged Sevenfold, and they were being supported in the 3 Arena in Dublin by Disturbed. So 2 of my kind of long-term favorite bands, and bizarrely, it was actually on my dad's birthday. So I was full of complex emotions going to a big metal gig surrounded by people. It was a bizarre. It was a quite slightly surreal event. But I think, surround yourself with the things that give to you, that don't take away from you. Is probably the. And with regard to movies and things like that, I don't think there's anything that has really kind of struck me recently that I can think of. I suppose one thing about music is, and around suicide, there's one issue I find with metal music in general. The lyrics can be quite triggering for people in some respects. I find the word committed is used all too regularly in a lot of metal music around suicide, and it's something that does kind of jar me quite regularly. I don't judge people who use it. I mean, I don't think the phrase "died by suicide" has the same ring to it when it comes to a lyric.
Yeah.
But it's once again down to education, and I suppose I feel part of my job as a facilitator is to educate where I can.
Perfect. Well, that's beautiful stuff, and I think that's definitely useful. I've seen that How Not to Give a Fuck. I've seen that bit. I haven't read it myself, but I've seen it been plastered on a few Instagram stories, so maybe I'll have to invest. We're just going to go into the last segment. I'll just play the music, and then we'll ask you how you get your shit together, and then we'll let you go. But play the great jingle, which I love for some reason, and then we'll get your top tips. Okie dokie. So, and if you could just share with us whatever it is that you do, or maybe that you do with HUGG as well, that helps you kind of keep on top of your stuff, and when you see that you're kind of getting down, that you do just to pick yourself back up again.
Yeah, I suppose it's taken me a couple of years to find the little things that do help me. One thing is doing a little mindfulness meditation, particularly on gratitude. Recently enough, I was quite stressed at work, and I was heading into the office, and I was rushing to get in there, and I hadn't eaten my lunch, and I was at work that was time sensitive, and I was stressed about money and stressed about this and the other, and when I parked the car, I went, hang on a second, what if this is in my control and what isn't? And I went, hang on, I'm not able to think straight right now, so I actually need to do some mindfulness. So there's a great app called Youper, Youper, and what it does is you have a conversation with the app, and then you can literally tell the app, type into the app, like a text conversation, like a Google Hangout or whatever. You can text the app and tell them, select from a kind of list of emotions, what you're feeling, the extent to which you're feeling them, and then it'll pull from a cloud a bit of data about well, this has worked for many other people based on this study. So do you want to try it? And you get the option of saying no, yes, or try something else. And on this particular day, I decided to try this particular gratitude mindfulness piece that it did. The voice that's on it isn't necessarily a voice I'd like to listen to all the time, but it got the message across at the same time. So it starts with a quick breathing thing, and then it goes for about 15 minutes, and you're just told to acknowledge the things that you are grateful for in your life, because the thing is, we do take a lot of things for granted every day, and we're realizing that now more so with this lockdown from coronavirus. We did take our freedom outdoors very much for granted before this. So that's one thing that certainly helps me. Another thing is being honest with people. That's something as I said, I've come very late to in life so far. I know I'm only 33, but it's only something I've kind of really started doing in the last year, is being honest with Kira, my girlfriend, with my boss. I've opened up to him about my mental health, and he supports me around it, which was one thing I'm massively grateful for. He allows me to fail, make mistakes, and supports me around not doing that in future. Do you know what I mean? That he doesn't berate me for making a mistake. He'll say, "Look, we all make mistakes, but just come to me and be honest with me, and we'll get through it." You know, so I have to say, he is he's a different type of man of his age. He'd be of the same age as my dad, and he's just, or slightly younger maybe, and he's a very I don't know what the word is, a very respectable and genuine human being, that I wish we all could meet someone like him, to be honest. So yeah, even in saying that, even in acknowledging that, I'm feeling better about my workload now at the moment as well. So I suppose I'm by no means perfect, as we've discussed. I certainly don't have all my shit together. Well, technically, I have all my shit in my spare bedroom, but with respect to my emotional togetherness, I am certainly better than I was this time last year. Certainly better than I was before my dad passed away, because I had a lot of unresolved stuff that I hadn't the courage to delve into, and I suppose the catalyst of my dad's death allowed me the permission to tear up the rule book that I had been given, and start writing my own one, I suppose.
Perfect. Just before we let you go, do you want to just give a plug to the foundations that you work for? So if anyone's listening and they wanted to reach out, maybe didn't catch the name as we were talking, they can then go onto the websites and find out more information.
Absolutely. So the one I spend a lot of my time working on behalf of is HUGG. HUGG stands for Healing Untold Grief Groups. We deal specifically with adults who are bereaved by suicide, people over the age of 18 who are bereaved by suicide. Originally, we were holding 3 groups across Dublin. At the moment now, we're resorting to an online space. If you search for HUGG on Facebook or hugg.ie, HUGG.ie, you'll find us. We're actually in the process of setting up an online only group to try and provide a safe space for people across the country. And then the other group I'm involved with is HUMen. So if you go to We Are HUMen, so we WEAREHUMEN.org. Or either wearehuman.org or wearehuman.com. Either way, Google HUMEN and you'll come across them. It's a new resource, but a worthwhile resource for people who need a safe, non-judgmental outlet to just express things that they wouldn't express to. The beauty of the HUMen group is it's anonymous, so you don't have to partake. You can literally listen, or you can say whatever is on your mind, and it's a safe space essentially for doing
that. Great stuff.
And the name of the app that you used on?
Yeah, the app is Youper, YOUPER. Yeah.
Perfect. Great stuff. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and your experience with us. I hope to anyone that's listening that they found it useful. Guys, if you have been listening, you listened all the way through. I know that these conversations can sometimes be uncomfortable to listen to, but I think that actually that makes them all the more worthwhile for having. And hopefully these types of conversations can foster more conversations in your own private homes. If you feel like anyone is maybe struggling, reach out. It's always the best thing to do. And if you are struggling yourself, then please also reach out. Thank you so much for listening, guys. And like always, if you've liked this, please like, rate, and subscribe. Pass it on to people who you think it may be of use to. And this will be available on all the platforms as per usual. But until next time, guys, keep safe.
Thank you very much.